Welcome back to episode 2 of the Dr. Beau Show. I'm going to call the season My Health Journey. We left off with my last labs in 2016 and me being a bit laissez-faire about what was going on possibly and trying to start looking into it a little bit more. But I want to back way up. I'm going to do the cliche coming out of my mother's womb. But I do think it's an important part of my story. So I was born on a stormy night. I was born in 1984, and I was born with what's called nuchal cord. So that is the umbilical cord wrapped around your neck. Around 20% of babies are born with this. It's not usually going to affect anybody long-term unless, obviously, they can't regain respiratory capacity after that. But even though I came out of my mother, as she says, basically blue because I wasn't breathing, not making a noise, which is probably terrifying for her. They unwrapped the umbilical cord, probably slapped me around or something, and I started breathing. Now, this next part of the story, nobody really knows what causes this. And again, when you ask my mom and my dad and what was going on, you hear all sorts of stuff, but I'll kind of show a picture up here that I was on a heart monitor for over the first year of my life because I would more or less go into cardiac arrest for whatever reason. Now, if you talk to my mom, she says this was due to acid reflux. I've looked up a lot of things. I don't know if you could ever pin down that some sort of a severe acid reflux that actually caused my heart to stop. Interesting note, Dr. Brett Winchester, one of my mentors, one of the top chiropractors in the world in Troy, Missouri, when I was at a seminar, I was being seen by him in his office when I was a student, and I have this band of broken blood vessels that kind of goes across the arch my rib cage, and he just looks at that real quick and he goes, "Do you have acid reflux as a kid?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "That's what that's from." And I was like, well, I didn't know what I didn't know then. And, I've asked him since, and he goes, it's just kind of showing undue stress around like the diaphragm with, it probably could be a lot of things, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, all sorts of stuff. And then we kind of have to ask like, well, what was going on with my heart? Needless to say, when people say, hey, what's an interesting fact that people wouldn't know about you? I always say, well, I've died 3 times. 2 of those were before I was 2 and, maybe 4 times. So maybe I was born dead because I was not breathing. My heart was not beating. I had 2 times on that heart monitor where if somebody wouldn't have gotten me, I don't think I'd be here today. One time in particular was, and you can see in the picture, there was a kind of an ECG cap that I wore with this heart monitor. I got 2 little burn marks where they didn't have enough jelly or some sort of lubricant on the electrodes that I wore, and it kind of burnt me at one point. But I guess my aunt, who happened to be a nurse, was watching me. And then this heart monitor, this is 1985, wasn't the best. I guess it ran off batteries and the batteries died. Anyways, my heart stopped. She just happened to come check on me. I'm laying there basically almost dead. She goes into, infant CPR and I start breathing again. And there was one other instance like that. So there were things that if we look at a whole health history that are kind of pointing out that like not everything was normal, but not anybody's hardly, just on the trajectory of purely normal. The third time that I say I died or fourth, whatever, I was, I think 13 or 14, I was cleaning the space. My mom had just moved into a new house, and the space where a stove went, there was a 220 wire that had bare ends, and we were told that it was dead wire. And there was tile backsplash that went all the way down to the floor. And my grandma and my mom and myself were in there. I remember my grandma was behind me on a ladder changing or cleaning a light fixture. And I'm washing this tile. So I remember I had one of the gallon buckets that, like cheap ice cream comes in and filled with soapy water. And I remember I put my hand in there and leaned forward, and that bare wire, which was not a dead wire, it was a live wire, touched me right under my heart. And that's the last thing I remember from that. I kind of remember getting blown back into the like a movie, blown back into the ladder that my grandma was on, and she fell. She was fine. The next thing I remember, it was a kind of bi-level house, so that I was laying on the stairs that went upstairs, and I just remember kind of coming to, and by the time I came to, I think within the next like maybe 30 seconds, the EMTs, they called 911, were coming in, and I'm just like, and I just felt super weird. If anybody's ever been electrocuted, it's not awesome. 220 is not super strong, but when you got your hand in a bucket of water and then you do that, it's just not the greatest thing in the world. So anyways, some things have happened. Uh, so that's kind of my super early life. Now, I'm not blaming my parents whatsoever. Knowing what I know now and knowing what we know now from just science and kids, uh, I was eating things like, rice cereal, rice formula. Obviously, my mom said that a lot of my, heart issues could be spurred by juice. So whatever juice I was drinking, which was just pure sugar, not blaming my parents. It just, we didn't know what we didn't know. And I remember I was the kid, if you were an 80s kid like me, this sounds absolutely horrible. But I remember eating like Raisin Bran and Frosted Flakes and putting sugar on it. We had like a sugar bowl. You'd put more sugar on it. So if you wanted to set a kid up for like diabetes later in life and just like case your liver in a nice sheen of fat for a cirrhotic change later, this is how you do it. All that to be said, love my parents to death. We didn't know what we didn't know, but it was not the healthiest scenario in general around food. Now, activity and exercise, I was just outside all the time, like a lot of 80s kids. Uh, I lived in the country, so I was just, I was outside all the time, active. I didn't have any body issues as far as weight gain or anything until I fractured my femur, which we will not talk about on this episode. We'll talk about in a future episode. What I want to hit on for the rest of the episode is the rest of the history surrounding my early life, which has to do with my parents. But I'm bringing this up because we know a couple things. We were talking the other day how Sloan was saying, the eggs of her granddaughter are within her. So there's 3 generations of genetic material within a female ova. But also we know the intergenerational epigenetic transition or transference occurs for 3 generations. So what I'm doing now will not only affect my daughter, but it will affect my great-granddaughter and my great-great-granddaughter, great-great-grandkids. So all of the things that I'm doing, all of the environmental stressors, or whether it's you or mouse stress, are having an effect on my genetic expression, which we'll maybe talk genetic specific here in a couple episodes, because I have all my genetic raw data. I've done SNP reports with LiveWell and all these things. I've done about everything you could. So it's good to explore this stuff, both for my own benefit, but helping other people. But let's back up to what I know of my grandparents. So my dad was 40 and my mom was 30 when they had me. So they're a little bit older, especially for that generation. I never knew my paternal grandma and grandpa, even though I believe, it's terrible not to know that I believe my grandpa Beard was alive for a year or two after I was born. And then my maternal grandmother was alive for a few years after I was born and then passed away. And my maternal grandfather had diabetes severely and was passed away before I was born. So within the realm of looking at just my grandparents, because I don't know a lot of the health history of my great-grandparents, not uncommon etiologies for my grandparents, but my maternal grandfather passed away from heart disease and diabetes. My maternal grandmother passed away from cancer. My paternal grandmother passed away from heart disease, and my paternal grandfather passed away from heart disease. Not uncommon for the times, but also not a great genetic or epigenetic tie-in for future generations. Now, go to my parents. I have far more data on their health because I've been around them my whole life. What have my parents, who are both still with us, dealt with? Well, My mom has dealt with, both parents have dealt with depression. My mom in particular has dealt with insomnia, sleep issues, depression to the clinical level, uh, you know, anxiety, a lot of mental health issues, which the more I explore the functional medicine side of mental health issues, the more I lean on the fact that I think most mental health issues can be obviously past stress, previous life experience, but a lot of it has to do with diet, sleep, exercise, because that's what's regulating your neurohormone axis, right? You're creating neurotransmitters in your gut. We know quite a few of them, almost all of them are. Uh, your hormones are then affecting your mood and sleep patterns. And then you regulate all that with like what you're eating, what you're thinking, how you're sleeping. So we may say, well, I'm depressed because, and we tie it to, trauma and previous life experience. Absolutely can be a thing. And part of it, right? It's not just one thing. But I really think, in particular, with the mental health crisis in the youth population nowadays, that we're seeing, obviously, the environment is a big factor with the inundation of, just what's going on with how much information is coming at them. Maybe it's not great information, social media. And then we add to that a lack of movement, poor diet, all this stuff. Shameless plug, I talk about in the Age of Movement. My latest book, you can go buy that on Amazon or Audible. But mental health on both sides. Now, my dad, later in life, when I was actually in graduate school, maybe before graduate school, maybe college, unbeknownst to me, got on antidepressants. And one time we were having a conversation, and he said, if I would have gotten on antidepressants earlier in my life, I think my mother and I would still be married, but I think it would have had a totally different life, which is a pretty sad realization to have when you're, in your late 60s, that, as much as I don't want people to rely on a medication, that if they need some sort of neurochemical change to occur to catalyze a reaction, which my dad is now off antidepressants, because that was his goal. Like, hey, this is a massive shift. And he started to have some major psychological things that he needed to deal with later in life. But a lot of his depression, in my opinion, is to do with PTSD issues from Vietnam. We're talking about, we laugh about it, but this is the guy that when he sleeps, snores like he is a logging operation in Oregon. It was terrible going on family vacations with this guy and not falling asleep before he did. So we know he has what right away? Sleep apnea, which now he's on a CPAP. Sleep apnea and sleep disturbances have a high correlation to mental health disorders. But also, he is notorious for fighting in his sleep when he says he doesn't recall the dreams, to the point where he is actually, not in an abusive way, but hit my stepmother and like kicks some punches and falls out of bed because he's in such a fight or flight mode during sleep. So that's obviously affecting his mental status in waking hours. Move over to back to my mom, polycystic kidney disease. We were talking about this the other day. I think 4, maybe 5+ decades of IBS, all the way back to high school. So definitely 5 decades of IBS, which she just, we're looking at diagnosis from prior standard physician care, especially in a small town where my mom was. My primary care physician when I was growing up, Dr. Carper, was a legit primary care, took care of it all at a very high level. It wasn't this uber specialized primary care that was very eager to refer out. It was like, hey, we got to take care of the person. That was missing. And then we had Dr. Forster, who is also a great general practitioner, both really good at taking care of a human and not just, here's medication, let's take your blood pressure, look in your ears, eyes, throat, and see you later. Polycystic kidney disease, IBS. She had a total hysterectomy after having me, due to a lot of, different menstrual issues, which then has this onset for early, menopause, and then a lot of perimenopausal stuff that she's still dealing with. Now, like, I'm 38, so that's a long time to deal with all these hormone issues. She's had, pelvic mesh put in, and then also was one of the unlucky individuals that had bad reactions to that. But probably her biggest health issue she's dealt with is respiratory issues. So since I've known her, She's been on some sort of a bronchodilator, multiple allergy medications. And we went on a trip to Germany when I was in grad school. I mean, it was sad, but she couldn't walk up the hills. And this is not, I mean, my mom at this time was hardly overweight, couldn't walk up the hills because she would get so out of breath. And I will talk about my visit to the pulmonologist with my mother in a later episode, but just eye-opening experience there. The respiratory issues, she always likes to correlate that to, my dad was a coal miner. They moved around a lot, and she was cleaning, I think the porch or the basement in one house, and she was cleaning up black mold with bleach, which we know now, not a great thing to do. She always says that's what catalyzed it. It could be, but as I get closer to the end of the season and kind of maybe come to some conclusions as I'm waiting today, this is Memorial Day, I'm waiting on lab tests for myself on some different things. Maybe we're going to start drawing some different conclusions, even with my parents, in particular my mom. But those are her big issues. She's had some other stuff. She had a minor colon resection a few years ago. Not the healthiest person in the world. And if I had to talk about habits, and this is not anything I haven't shared with her, again, her sleep, maybe out of her control somewhat. She's used sleep aids and everything like that. But like, I just remember stay up. She could read a whole novel in a night. And was that because she couldn't sleep or she was so into the book? I don't know. But that was just a common theme that she get up and go to work. And just not a healthy eater, and was lucky enough for the first 4.5 decades of her life to not have to exercise and just not gain weight whatsoever. And now that is not the issue, are not the case. And, now she's dealing with weight issues and wanting to get that off, but not an exerciser because that was never part of her life. Always worked, manual work, yard work, but not a exerciser. Now it's coming back to haunt her as one of the other things she's dealt with is like severe osteoporosis to the point that she's taking infusions and injections. And it's not getting any better. And you tie that in with respiratory issues and all these other things that it could be and how they're all correlated, which gets is it correlated? Is it causative? It's hard to say. But I mean, she's had, acute stress fractures in her, the neck of her femur when they went on a trip to Rome, walking around on cobblestone streets. So all that to be said, like that's my mom, right? So that's one side of the genetic pool, whether that's a lot of epigenetic environmental stuff throughout her life, or that's true genetic stuff. It's a little bit of all of it. My dad, we talked about the kind of PTSD, depression stuff. Some of this other stuff gets interesting because, again, he went to Vietnam. A large conglomerate of Vietnam veterans are on partial or total disability due to things that are thought to be correlated with Agent Orange, which was a chemical warfare agent used in Vietnam that is just a gnarly one. But everything from heart disease to dementia, Alzheimer's, but the big one for this population, right, the baby boomers, that is correlated with Agent Orange, whether it's true or not, is diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Now, my dad, for the first 6 decades of his life, again, up until, I'd say until he was 25, guy could eat, and he did, sweets and whatever he wanted. He had a bit of a sweet tooth, even though he says he doesn't. And never gained an ounce of weight, right? And was always very lean, had lean muscle mass. He his operated a bulldozer until his later part of his life. He was a manager. Was always working outside, hunting, hiking, all these things. Didn't exercise, but was always doing something. Never had weight gain. And even after he was diagnosed with diabetes and got on insulin therapy, still didn't even have central adiposity. Was a pretty lean looking guy, but was starting to have major blood sugar regulation issues. Interesting side note with him, when I was in grad school, I only lived an hour away from him. And I remember they were asking us, hey, what supplements could I take? What could I eat? We would be bringing him, stuff from Whole Foods. And he got off of insulin at one point and was exercising a little bit. I can't say why it went the other way, but then all that stopped. But I was like stoked. He, in my mind, was like in the prime of his life, doing what he wanted to do, had a great setup, making plenty of money, was gaining his health back, and then kind of just went the other way. And it's always interesting, like if you see positive outcomes, why at some point would you just let all that go away? I don't know. and that may have other, environmental factors or mental health factors in it. Much like his father and his mother, I can't remember exactly what age. I want to say early 60s. My dad, I think the original story was he was operating a bulldozer and he noticed that like he was getting very lightheaded and was having this kind of tightness through his jaw. And anybody that's watching or listening can probably say, oh, that's a little bit of a heart issue. Well, he didn't know that to the point where he was running a bulldozer one day and passed out. And luckily, I think the bulldozer just stopped, but passed out because of lack of blood flow, and went in and had two or three major artery blockages, and had 2 stents put in on the first surgery. And since then, has had 2 other stent surgeries. So I believe he has 4 stents in now and is on a plethora of medications, insulin, blood pressure medication. Blood pressure has become a huge issue for him in the past couple of years. And again, we can't say what all these causes are, but again, a lifestyle of getting away with it is one of it. And I am guilty of that to a certain extent, because even though from high school, I've been interested in health, I still, have done things, which I'll talk about more specifically on other episodes, that I wanted to have my cake and eat it too. And just some people can get away with it better than others. And, my mom and dad got away with it for a long time. My dad more than my mom. My dad is now 77 and it's still super active. He's out, working with horses, building things, operating bulldozers on our land still. But again, there's things that I'm aware of that they could have been doing throughout their life that would have just got them in a much better spot at what's, the golden years of their life, that were learning lessons for me. But I'm also highly aware of, now that I have a daughter, and also, if we're talking about our daughter and looking at Sloan's parents, we're looking at, with her mom, rheumatoid arthritis, pre-diabetes, her dad, pre-diabetes, blood pressure issues, celiac disease with her mom, rheumatoid, all these things that are part of the environment, and then the epigenetic prevalence. And then I'll talk more specifically about Sloan and I's kind of health altogether, as it pertains to Maddox, our daughter. But that's, where I come from. My dad was a farm kid. My mom was raised on a farm initially in California, my dad in Missouri. And the things that we know now that are requirements to be healthy just were not part of a normal lifestyle, right? Some of the things that they did have fallen by the wayside that were very healthy, right? Like the foods that they ate, and the way that they ate them, right? Like raw dairy, making their own butter, eating, tail to nose or nose to tail, being outside, being barefoot. All these things occurred as a kid just because they were a byproduct of not having a lot of money and living on farms. Those were all great, which probably made them a bit more robust for all of the things that weren't going to be awesome in their health future, as time went on and became more middle-class America. So that's kind of, my background, as as a baby. Like I said, my parents, a bit into my history, and I'm trying to lay the foundation of this story of first of all, how complex this can be. You can see how many factors you kind of have to take into account if you're going to work with somebody or you're trying to figure out your own health issues. It is not singular cause and effect with a human. It is rarely, even when we say like, this person has pneumonia, this is why they're having respiratory distress. Like, well, why did they get pneumonia this time? Like, yeah, stuff can happen, right? Even like my femur fracture, I'm always thinking, which we'll talk about, why did that happen? Was it just a freak accident, or was there something that set me up for maybe having that fracture, right? A movement thing or a physiologic thing that set me up for that femur fracture. I'll never know, but I'm always questioning. And you can question too much and never get to an actual, what I would call a semi-conclusion, because we're never 100% sure in medicine, and in particular medicine with humans. But we're always trying to get right to that, like, that edge of 99.98 or 99 100% positive on what we're doing and then move forward very confidently. But yeah, we've laid the groundwork. Next episode, I'm going to move back or move forward in time again to where we left off in episode 1, where I had left off with my last labs, what's been going on. And we'll get back into where things really started to kind of come to light and maybe even fall apart with my own health. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. I appreciate you watching or listening, and look out for episode 3 on the way.